I didn't mean to grab her. The Hendersons' living room was packed that Saturday evening. Bodies everywhere. Music too loud for the space. Someone laughed behind me and shoved forward, and the crowd shifted like a wave I wasn't ready for. My shoulder took the hit first. Then my hand shot out, just instinct, reaching for anything to stop myself from stumbling. I caught fabric. Silk. Smooth and cool under my fingers. And then I felt it. Something underneath. Not skin. Not the normal feel of clothing layers. Something rigid. Hard. Structured in a way that made no sense. My hand jerked back like I'd touched a hot stove. My wife, Naomi, spun around fast. Real fast. Her glass tilted and champagne ran down the side, dripping onto the marble floor. Her face didn't show embarrassment. It showed something else entirely. Pure, raw panic. The kind that happens before your brain can put on a mask. And before I could even speak, before I could say sorry or laugh it off, I looked past her. Our eyes met. And for one long second, neither of us moved. I didn't know what I'd felt yet. But I knew, deep in my gut, something was very, very wrong. You okay, babe? Her voice came out smooth. Controlled. Like nothing had happened. She touched my arm first, a gentle squeeze, and smiled the smile she gives at work events when she's performing rather than feeling. Yeah, I said. Someone knocked me. Crowded in here. She laughed softly and turned back toward the group she'd been talking to. Just like that. Like nothing. But her other hand, the one holding the glass, was pressed flat against the side of her dress. Holding it close. Not naturally. Deliberately. I stood there and watched her re-enter the conversation. Watched her laugh at something Paul Henderson said. Watched her throw her head back like the evening was perfect. And I kept thinking about what I felt. 2 years. We'd been married 2 years. I knew this woman's body. I knew the way she moved in a room, the way fabric fell against her frame, the things she wore and why. What I felt under that silk skirt was not something I recognized. Not a garment. Not a device I'd ever seen her use. Not anything she'd ever mentioned. Rigid. Shaped. Pressed flat against her outer thigh. My glass was still in my hand. I realized I hadn't moved in almost a minute. I made myself breathe. Made myself smile when her eyes found mine again. But the question had already taken root. What was that? The drive home was quiet in the wrong way. Not the comfortable silence we'd built over 2 years. The tight kind. The kind where both people are thinking loudly and pretending not to. Naomi looked out the passenger window the whole way. I kept my eyes on the road and replayed the moment over and over. The feel of it. The shape. The way her face cracked for just a second before she pulled herself back together. She'd recovered fast. Too fast. That kind of recovery doesn't happen with innocent things. We got home, and she went straight to the bathroom. Stayed in there 11 minutes, I counted, without meaning to. When she came out, she was already in her pajamas. The dress was gone. Everything was gone. Good night, she asked, folding back her side of the bed. Good enough, I said. You? Tired, she said. Paul talks too much. She laughed. I laughed. We turned the lights off. And I lay there in the dark next to my wife of 2 years and thought about all the little things I'd filed away as nothing. The weeknight she came home 2 hours late and said traffic was terrible, on a Tuesday in February when the roads were clear. The phone she'd started keeping face down. The account notification that popped up once on her laptop. An account I'd never heard of. Just little things. That's what I'd told myself. Until tonight. My name is Aaron Brooks. I'm 34 years old. I work in logistics management for a mid-sized shipping company downtown. I'm not a suspicious person by nature. I've always believed that a good marriage is built on trust, and that trust means you don't go looking for problems that might not exist. Naomi and I met at a mutual friend's barbecue 4 years ago. She laughed at something I said, and I decided right there to marry her. Not seriously. Just one of those quiet thoughts that turns out to be a decision. We dated for 18 months. Got married at a small venue outside the city. 60 guests. dancing until midnight. The first year was good. Great, even. The second year, I thought was good too. But that night, lying in the dark, I started doing what I hadn't let myself do before. I started being honest about the moments that hadn't felt right. The way she sometimes paused before answering simple questions. The way certain topics, money, her sister, her schedule on Thursdays, seemed to have invisible fences around them. The way she occasionally looked at me like she was measuring something. I'd always found reasons to explain those things away. People are complicated. Marriage is complicated. Not everything means something. But the thing under her skirt. That meant something. I just didn't know what yet. 3 days passed. I didn't bring it up. Not because I was scared, but because I was thinking. If something was being hidden from me, the worst thing I could do was tip my hand before I understood what I was looking at. Questions without answers just give people time to build better lies. So I watched instead. Naomi went about her week like normal. Morning coffee. Work. Gym on Wednesdays. Home by 7. Dinner. TV. Sleep. Normal. Routine. Comfortable. But I was paying a different kind of attention now. On Thursday morning, she told me she had a client meeting that would run late. I nodded. I'll make dinner. She kissed my cheek. You're the best. She wasn't home until 9:47 p.m. I checked my phone when I heard the key in the lock. Not to catch her, just to note it. The way you note things when you've started noticing. How was it? I asked. Exhausting, she said. The client wants everything renegotiated. It was one of those days. She went to the kitchen. Made tea. Sat across from me at the table. And I watched her hands. Steady. Relaxed. No tension. She was either telling the truth, or she was extremely good at this. I smiled and told her I'd kept dinner warm. She thanked me. And the question kept growing, quiet and patient, somewhere behind my ribs. The following week, I did something I wasn't proud of. I looked at our bank statements. Not secretly. Technically, I had full access to our joint account. But I'd never been the one to monitor it. Naomi handled the finances. She was better with numbers, more organized, and I trusted her completely. I poured through 3 months of statements. Most of it was normal. Groceries. Utilities. The mortgage. Her gym membership. My car payment. But on the second month, I found a transfer. $1,100. Moved to an account with a reference number I didn't recognize. No label. No note. The following month, $950. Same destination. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. It wasn't a massive amount. Not the kind of number that screams emergency. But it was consistent. Regular. The kind of transfer that looks deliberate when you know what to look for. I thought about asking her. I almost did. But I remembered the party. The way she recovered. The way she smiled. If she could do that so smoothly, a direct question would get me a smooth answer. I needed more than a question. I needed to understand the full picture first. So I closed the laptop, made another coffee, and started building a list in the Notes app on my phone. The list grew. Not accusations. Just facts. Party, March 4th. Felt something rigid under her skirt on her outer left thigh. She panicked. Recovered fast. Thursdays, consistently late home. Has been for at least 4 months based on what I now remember. Transfers, $1,100 in January. $950 in February. Same unknown account. Phone, always face down since around November last year. Account on laptop. Saw a notification 9 months ago. Didn't think anything of it at the time. I looked at the list and felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not yet. More like clarity. The kind that comes when you stop explaining things away and just let them sit there honestly. I wasn't imagining things. This was a pattern. The question was, what kind of pattern? I didn't want to assume the worst. Naomi wasn't perfect, but she wasn't cruel. She wasn't someone who played games for the fun of it. So if she was hiding something this carefully, this consistently, It wasn't impulsive. It was planned. And planned secrets are a different thing entirely from mistakes. They require decision, commitment, a reason big enough to keep choosing the lie, week after week, month after month. I needed to know what that reason was. I called my older brother, Patrick, on a Sunday afternoon while Naomi was at her mother's house. I didn't tell him everything. Just enough. If someone's moving money consistently from a joint account to somewhere you don't recognize, I asked, what does that usually mean? Patrick is a financial advisor. He didn't ask why I was asking. He just answered. Depends, he said. Could be savings they're keeping separate. Could be paying off a debt they don't want you to know about. Could be building a fund. Building a fund for what? A pause. Could be anything, Aaron. An emergency fund. A business. Or, he stopped. Or what? Or they're preparing for something that requires them to have money you don't know about. I said nothing. You okay? He asked. Just curious, I said. Financial question for work. He didn't believe me. Patrick never believes me. But he let it go. After we hung up, I sat on the back porch with a cold coffee and thought about what he said. Preparing for something. I didn't want to go where that sentence was pointing. But I also couldn't keep pretending I wasn't headed there. So I did the only thing that made sense. I made an appointment. Not with a counselor. Not with a friend. With a private attorney. Her name was Patricia Owens. She had an office on the 14th floor of a building downtown, 3 blocks from where I worked. I went during my lunch break on a Wednesday and told the receptionist it was a personal legal matter. Patricia was direct. No small talk. I liked that immediately. I told her what I knew. The transfers. The pattern. The thing I felt at the party and couldn't explain. The general feeling that I was being kept outside a structure that somehow included my life. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked 2 questions. Is your marriage happy, to your knowledge? I thought so, I said. Until recently. Are you prepared for the possibility that what you discover may not be reversible? I sat with that for a moment. I need to know the truth, I said. Whatever it is. She nodded slowly. Then here's what I'd like you to do, she said. Keep documenting. Don't confront. Don't tip her off. I'm going to run a search on that account number and the asset structure around your marriage. It may take a week or 2. What are you looking for? She folded her hands on the desk. I want to see if what you're describing is personal or financial. I drove back to work and spent the afternoon staring at shipping manifests without reading a single one. 2 weeks passed. I got good at pretending. Better than I expected, honestly. I made dinner 3 times that week. We watched a show Naomi had been talking about for months. I laughed at the right moments. I held her hand on the couch. And I watched. Not aggressively. Just, awake. Present in a way I hadn't been when I thought everything was fine. I noticed that she only ever put her phone face down when she was in the same room as me. When she thought she was alone, in the kitchen, in the hallway, she held it normally. That detail mattered. It meant the behavior was about managing me, not habit. I noticed she always drove herself to her mother's house now. Never asked me to come along. For the first year of our marriage, I went regularly. The shift had been gradual enough that I hadn't tracked when it started. I also noticed she was more affectionate than usual. Small touches. Extra attention. The kind of warmth that, in the past, I would have just received with gratitude. Now it felt like padding. Like someone placing cushions around a vase they're afraid of knocking over. I kept smiling. Kept being kind. Kept writing things down in the Notes app and locking my phone. Patricia's office hadn't called yet. She called on a Thursday morning while I was between meetings. Can you come in today? Patricia said. I'd rather talk in person. That sentence alone told me something. People who deliver good news don't care whether it's in person or on the phone. I rearranged my afternoon and was in her office by 3 o'clock. She had a folder on her desk. Thin, but dense with meaning, the way legal documents always are. The account receiving transfers from your joint account, she said, belongs to a holding structure. What kind of structure? It's a family trust, she said. Established 18 months ago. The named trustee is your wife. The beneficiaries listed are your wife, her sister, and her sister's children. I stared at her. A family trust, I repeated. Yes. And there's more. She opened the folder. Prior to your marriage, your wife purchased a property, a small rental unit. That property was transferred into the trust 14 months ago, shortly before you would have been legally entitled to a share. I felt the room tilt slightly. She moved it out of reach, I said. Patricia didn't soften it. Yes, she said. Deliberately. And strategically. I drove home slowly that evening. Took the long route. Past the park by the river where Naomi and I used to walk on Sunday mornings when we were still dating. Past the restaurant where I proposed, a booth in the back, a ring I'd carried in my jacket pocket for 3 days because I kept losing my nerve. Past the life I thought we were building together. And I thought about what Patricia had said. A trust. A property. Transfers from our joint account feeding into a structure that existed to protect assets from me specifically. I thought about the thing under her skirt. I still didn't fully understand that part. Patricia hadn't been able to explain it, and I hadn't pressed. It felt separate, personal in a way the financial structure wasn't. But now I was starting to think nothing was separate. Everything was connected. And somewhere in that connection was a decision Naomi had made, possibly before we even got married, to keep a version of her life that I couldn't touch. Not an affair. Not something dramatic. Something quieter. Colder. She had looked at our marriage and decided, this far and no further. She'd drawn a line around herself that I hadn't known existed. And I had spent 2 years living on the wrong side of it. I needed to understand the skirt. Everything else was beginning to take shape. The money, the trust, the property, the calculated distance she'd kept between her real life and our life together. But the thing I'd felt at the Hendersons' party still didn't fit cleanly into the financial picture. It was too personal. Too physical. I did something I should have done weeks earlier. I talked to my friend Dwight. Dwight had been a nurse for 9 years before moving into medical equipment sales. He knew bodies, devices, and the things people sometimes wore or carried for reasons they didn't advertise. I described what I'd felt as carefully as I could. The location. The shape. The rigidity. He was quiet for a moment. Outer thigh, he said. Yeah. Flat. Like a panel. More like a case. Or a sleeve. Another pause. Aaron, that sounds like it could be a document holder. The kind people use when they're traveling and want to keep papers flat against their body. Or, he hesitated. What? Could be a medical device. Continuous monitoring equipment. Insulin pump components sometimes sit like that on the thigh. I sat very still. She's never mentioned anything medical, I said. That's the thing about some conditions, Dwight said quietly. People manage them privately for all kinds of reasons. That changed everything. I sat with it for 2 full days. What if the thing under her skirt wasn't deception in the way I'd been imagining? What if it was something she'd chosen to manage alone, a health condition she'd kept private, and I'd accidentally stumbled into it? That would explain the panic. The recovery. The deliberate secrecy. It wouldn't explain the trust, the property, the transfers. But those were separate. Weren't they? I went back through my notes. Looked at every entry with fresh eyes. And slowly, carefully, I separated 2 things that I'd been treating as one. First, her private health situation, if that's what it was. Something personal. Something she had every right to manage the way she chose. Second, the financial structure. The trust. The property removed from our marital estate. The money flowing out of our joint account. One was about her body and her privacy. The other was about our marriage and my future. They felt different now. And I knew which one actually threatened me. I called Patricia. I want to focus on the financial structure, I said. Regardless of anything else, what are my legal options? That, she said, is the right question. Patricia explained it carefully and without emotion, which I appreciated. Under the law in our state, assets moved into a trust before divorce filing, if done with intent to shield them from division, could potentially be challenged. But it depended on timing, documentation, and proof of intent. The property transfer was the clearest issue. 14 months into our marriage, Naomi had moved a premarital asset into a family trust. Technically, premarital assets were often protected anyway. But the timing mattered. And the fact that our joint account transfers were now feeding that trust, that was different. Marital funds used to maintain or grow a trust can create what's called a transmutation argument, Patricia said. Meaning those funds may now have a marital character. Meaning you may have a claim. I exhaled slowly. How strong a claim? Depends on how well we document it. She looked at me over the folder. You've been keeping records? Yes. Dates. Amounts. Screenshots where possible. Yes. For the first time since all of this started, she almost smiled. Then we're in better shape than you think, she said. I nodded slowly and looked out the window at the city below. 2 years. She'd had 2 years to build this quietly. I'd had 6 weeks. I went home that evening and made pasta. Naomi came in just after 7, dropped her bag by the door, and said the meeting ran long. Same client? I asked. Different one, she said. Worse. I handed her a glass of water. She thanked me. She sat at the kitchen counter while I finished cooking and told me about a colleague who'd made a mistake on a proposal. I listened. I laughed at the right moments. I served dinner and we sat across from each other and talked about ordinary things. And I thought, she's good at this. But so was I now. That was the thing about being lied to for long enough. You eventually learn the language. Not to use it the same way. I had no interest in deceiving her. But I could hold a conversation that looked one way on the surface while an entirely different reality ran underneath it. The way she'd been doing for 2 years. After dinner, she curled up on the couch with a book. I washed the dishes slowly and thought about the word Patricia had used. Transmutation. The process by which one thing becomes another. The process by which her separate money had, by mixing with ours, become something we both had a stake in. I dried my hands and put the kettle on. I was going to be okay. Her sister, Claudine, called the house phone on a Friday evening. We still had a house phone, Naomi's idea, actually, from early in our marriage. She liked the idea of a landline for emergencies. I answered before Naomi got to it. Oh, Aaron. Claudine's voice shifted. Not dramatically. Just a small adjustment. Is Naomi there? She's in the shower, I said. Can I take a message? No, it's fine. I'll call her cell. A pause. Then she said, and I don't think she meant to say it out loud, I thought she would have told him by now. Sorry. I said. A longer pause. Nothing. Never mind. Tell her I called. She hung up. I stood there with the receiver in my hand. I thought she would have told him by now. Told me what? The trust. The property. Something else. I wrote it down in my notes app word for word, including the time and date. When Naomi came downstairs, I told her Claudine had called and was going to ring her cell. Oh, okay, she said easily. Probably about the weekend. She went to the kitchen and called her sister back. I sat in the living room and listened to the tone of the conversation without the words. Short. Controlled. Naomi's voice careful and clipped in a way it usually wasn't with family. Whatever Claudine had said, Naomi was managing it. I met with Patricia one more time before I made any decision. I needed to understand all of it, not just the legal position, but the full shape of what had been built around me without my knowledge. She walked me through it in plain language. The trust had been established with Naomi's premarital savings. Fine. Legally, that was her right. The property, a 2-bedroom rental unit on Dalton Street, purchased 3 years before we met, had been transferred into the trust after our marriage. That was where it got complicated. But the transfers from our joint account, monthly, consistent, quietly labeled as family expenses, Those had been used to cover the property's maintenance costs and a portion of its management fees for at least 14 months. She used marital money to maintain an asset held in a trust designed to exclude you, Patricia said. Yes. And she did this while you had no knowledge of the trust's existence. None. Patricia set down her pen. Aaron, I want to be direct with you. You have a legitimate legal argument. Not just about the transfers, but potentially about the intent behind the entire structure. I nodded. And the clause? I asked. The one in the documents I signed early in the marriage. She exhaled carefully. That clause was designed to waive certain rights regarding premarital assets. It was buried in a longer document. Courts take a dim view of material clauses that aren't clearly flagged. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that wasn't dread. I kept living normally. That was the strangest part of all of it. Getting up. Making coffee. Commuting. Working. Coming home. Eating dinner. Watching television. Sleeping next to her. All of it exactly the same on the surface. All of it completely different underneath. I thought a lot about who Naomi actually was during those weeks. Not the version I'd been angry at. Not the version who'd deceived me. But the full person. She was smart. She was disciplined. She was someone who planned things carefully and executed quietly. In another context, I'd have admired it. She wasn't cruel. I don't think she hated me. I think she'd made a calculation early on, maybe before we even married, that she needed to protect herself. That no relationship was certain enough to trust completely. And she'd acted on that calculation. She just hadn't accounted for one thing. That I might eventually do the same. I transferred 2 months of my personal salary into a separate account I opened in my name alone. Not to be deceptive. To be protected. I made sure my income records were clean and current. I backed up every document Patricia had given me. And I waited for the right moment. It came from Claudine again, accidentally. Naomi's birthday was in April, and Claudine came to the house for the small celebration we'd planned. Just family, just dinner, casual. At some point in the evening, after the second bottle of wine, Claudine made the mistake that broke everything open. She was talking about a property investment she was considering, and she looked at Naomi and said, I mean, you know how these things work, you've been managing Dalton Street for years. Naomi went very still. I picked up my fork slowly. Dalton Street. I said, keeping my voice easy. Curious. Like I'd just misheard something. Claudine looked at Naomi. Naomi looked at me. 2 seconds of silence that felt like falling. It's just a small investment, Naomi said. Her voice was steady. From before we met. Not really relevant. Right, I said. And I smiled. Of course. I filled Claudine's glass. Changed the subject. Let Naomi breathe again. But that night, after Claudine left and Naomi was loading the dishwasher, I went to my phone and added 3 words to my notes. She confirmed. She knows. I called Patricia the next morning. She knows that I know, I said. How do you know that? Because when her sister mentioned the property by name in front of me, Naomi watched my face. Not to see my reaction. To measure how much I already knew. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then we're close, she said. How close? I've finished the asset trace. I have documentation of the trust, the property, the transfer history, and the timeline relative to your marriage. I also have a legal opinion on the clause you signed. You're positioned well, Aaron. What does well mean? It means if this goes to court, you have a strong argument for a share of the trust's marital funded gains. It means the clause is contestable. It means the transfers from your joint account constitute a documented contribution to an asset you were deliberately excluded from. I sat down. What do I do now? I asked. You decide, she said simply. That's always been the choice. Fight for the marriage or fight for what you're owed leaving it. I can help you with either, but you're the only one who can make that decision. I looked out the window for a long time. Then I said, I've already made it. I didn't tell her right away. I had 1 more week of normal. We went to dinner on Thursday. A place we both loved, small Italian restaurant near the theatre district, checkered tablecloths, candles in wine bottles. The kind of place that feels like an occasion without trying. We shared a bottle of red. She ordered the gnocchi. I had the lamb. She was warm that evening. Funny. Present in a way she hadn't been in months. I wondered if she was saying goodbye in her own way, preparing for the conversation she assumed was coming. Or maybe she was trying, for one last night, to remember why we started. Either way, I let the evening be what it was. I didn't perform happiness. I felt it, quietly and genuinely, the way you can feel something good and know it's ending at the same time. We walked home because the night was mild. She held my arm, pointed out a dog wearing a jacket, made me laugh. And I thought, this is the person I married. Not the strategy. Not the trust. Not the hidden structure. This person. But you can love someone and still know they chose not to love you the whole way. You can grieve the real thing inside the false one. I told her on a Sunday morning. Not with raised voices. Not dramatically. We were at the kitchen table, both of us with coffee, and I put my phone face up between us with the screen showing the trust documents Patricia had sent over. I watched her look at them. I watched the moment she understood. Aaron, she started. I'm not angry, I said. And I meant it. I want you to know that first. I'm not here to fight. She was quiet. I know about the trust, I said. I know about Dalton Street. I know about the transfers. I know about the clause in the documents I signed. I know all of it. Her hands, wrapped around her mug, tightened slightly. I hired a lawyer 6 weeks ago, I said. I've been documenting for longer. She looked up. And something crossed her face that I hadn't expected. Not defiance. Not calculation. Relief. Like a weight she'd been holding for 2 years had finally, at enormous cost, been set down. I was going to tell you, she said. When? A long pause. I don't know. We talked for 3 hours. Real talking. Maybe the realest we'd ever done. She told me about the fear. The one she carried from watching her parents divorce, a disaster of hidden debt and sudden poverty that had shaped everything about how she understood money and security. She told me she'd built the trust before we met, out of pure self-protection, and then never found a way to undo it once we were together. She told me the thing under her skirt at the Hendersons' party was a medical monitor, a glucose monitoring device she'd been managing since a diagnosis the year before we married. She hadn't told me because she didn't know how. Because she was afraid it would change how I looked at her. Not a scheme. Not a power move. Just fear. In 2 different forms. I listened to all of it. And I believed her. That was the complicated part. I believed her, and it still wasn't enough. Because belief doesn't rebuild trust once you've seen what someone is capable of keeping from you. It just means you understand how it happened. Understanding is not the same as being safe. And I had to be honest about that. We separated 4 weeks later. Naomi moved into a furnished apartment on the east side of the city. I kept the house, at least for now. Patricia negotiated a fair settlement. The trust was restructured. My contribution to its marital-funded gains was recognized and returned. The clause I signed was found to be insufficiently disclosed and set aside. It was handled cleanly. Both of us acted with more grace than I think either of us expected. The last time I saw her, to exchange some items she'd left behind, she stood at the door and said, "I'm sorry I didn't know how to just tell you." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry I didn't notice sooner that something was wrong." We stood there for a moment, 2 people who had genuinely cared for each other, standing in the wreckage of a structure that had never been fully built. Then she left. I went back inside. Made coffee. Stood at the kitchen window for a long time. The thing I kept coming back to wasn't anger. It was a question I'd been turning over for weeks. How much of what felt real was real? And then, slowly, a more honest answer than the question deserved. Enough of it. Enough that it mattered. Enough that it hurt. And sometimes that has to be enough to move forward from. Even when it isn't enough to stay.